The dinner party at the penthouse was a masterpiece of curated perfection. Crystal stemware, vintage Cabernet, and the glittering Chicago skyline as a backdrop. But the flaw was in the reflection of the patio doors. My wife's hand lingering a second too long on another man's lower back, right as she turned to laugh at my career. It wasn't the infidelity that killed the love instantly. It was the cruelty of her smile while she did it. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet moments before a storm, where the loudest sound is a breaking heart, stay with me. There are secrets in this city that we haven't uncovered yet. The condensation on the crystal wine glass was the only thing cold enough to match the temperature in the room. Lucas Bennett sat at the far end of the mahogany dining table, his fingers tracing the stem of his glass. The dinner party was in full swing, hosted in the penthouse suite of Julian Thorne, one of Chicago's most aggressive real estate developers. The air smelled of roasted duck, expensive cologne, and the metallic tang of ambition. To his right, his wife Elena was glowing. She wore the emerald silk dress he had saved for 3 months to buy her for their anniversary, but tonight she wore it for the room, specifically for Julian. Architecture is about legacy, Lucas said quietly, responding to a polite inquiry from a woman across the table. It's about building spaces that heal the community, not just warehouse them. Oh, stop it, Lucas! Elena's voice cut through the conversation like a serrated knife. She laughed, a tinkling performative sound that made Lucas's stomach turn. She swirled her wine, leaning aggressively toward Julian. He calls them healing spaces. I call them imaginary castles. Honestly, if Lucas spent half as much time looking for a real firm as he does drawing sketches on napkins, we wouldn't still be renting in Logan Square. The table chuckled. It was a low, polite ripple of amusement, but it stripped Lucas bare. He felt the heat rise up his neck, not from embarrassment, but from a sudden clarifying shock. It's charming, really, Julian added, his eyes locked on Elena. Ideally, we'd all be artists, wouldn't we? But someone has to pay for the wine. Julian raised his glass. Elena clinked hers against it, her eyes sparkling with an adoration she hadn't shown Lucas in years. To the ones who pay for the wine, Elena toasted, her voice husky. Lucas watched them. He watched the way the light caught the diamond stud in Julian's cufflink. He watched Elena's hand drop beneath the table. Because he was an architect, Lucas noticed details. He noticed structural weaknesses. He noticed fractures in foundations before the building collapsed. He dropped his napkin, pretending to retrieve it. He lowered his head just below the lip of the table. There it was. Elena's hand wasn't on her lap. It was resting on Julian's thigh, her fingers kneading the fabric of his trousers, possessively. Julian's hand covered hers, his thumb stroking her knuckles. The world didn't stop. The earth didn't shake. The dinner conversation continued above him. Someone discussing interest rates. Someone else complaining about the winter forecast. But down there, in the shadows beneath the mahogany, the truth of his marriage was laid out in simple geometry. 2 hands, intertwined. Lucas sat up. He placed his napkin neatly on the table. The noise of the room seemed to dampen, as if he were underwater. He looked at Elena. She wasn't looking at him. She was whispering something to Julian, her lips brushing his ear, her neck exposed. She was mocking his dream to seduce another man, using his failures as foreplay. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't anger, it was the feeling of a tether snapping, a heavy weight, one he hadn't realized he was carrying, simply falling away into the abyss. "Lucas?" the woman across from him asked. "Are you all right? You look pale." Elena glanced over, annoyance flickering in her gaze. "He's fine, he just gets moody when people don't worship his blueprints. Don't you, darling?" Lucas looked at her, really looked at her. He memorized the curve of her jaw, the specific shade of lipstick, the cruelty in her eyes that masqueraded as wit. He wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was, so he would never, ever be tempted to return to it. "I'm fine," Lucas said. His voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. "I just realized I left something unfinished." "Well, don't let us keep you," Julian smirked, reaching for the wine bottle to refill Elena's glass. "We have plenty to discuss." "I'm sure you do," Lucas said. He stood up. He didn't slam the table. He didn't throw his drink. He simply pushed his chair back, nodded to the host, and walked toward the foyer. "Lucas!" Elena called out, half laughing, half scolding. Don't be dramatic. Where are you going? He didn't turn back. He walked past the coat check, past the marble statues, and into the private elevator. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the penthouse, Lucas exhaled. He checked his watch, 9:15 p.m. If he hurried, he could be packed and gone before she even realized he wasn't coming back. The key turned in the lock of the Logan Square apartment, whoosh with a familiar, heavy clunk. Inside, the air was stale, smelling faintly of the expensive lilies Elena insisted on buying weekly and the sharp scent of her hairspray. It was the smell of a life Lucas had spent 5 years trying to build, a life that now felt like a museum exhibit he was visiting for the last time. He didn't turn on the main lights. The amber glow from the street lamps outside filtered through the blinds, painting stripes of shadow across the living room floor. He moved with a strange, dissociative efficiency, like a man defusing a bomb. He went straight to the bedroom. He pulled his battered leather duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet. It was the same bag he'd used in college, back when he had nothing but ideas and ambition. It seemed fitting that it was the only thing leaving with him now. He didn't pack his clothes first. He packed his hard drives. He packed the 3 black sketchbooks on his nightstand, the ones containing the designs for the imaginary castles Elena had laughed at. He packed his laptop. These were the only assets that truly belonged to him. Then came the clothes, jeans, t-shirts, a thick sweater. He ignored the suits Elena had picked out for him, the ones she said made him look presentable for her friends. He left them hanging there, ghostly silhouettes in the dark closet. He walked to the bathroom. He swept his toiletries into a small kit. His eyes caught his reflection in the mirror. He looked calm, too calm. His heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs, a war drum announcing a retreat. He returned to the living room. On the mantel sat a framed photo from their wedding day. They were laughing, caught in a candid moment before the pose. Elena looked adoringly at him. Lucas picked it up. For a second, his thumb brushed over the glass above her face. He didn't smash it. That would be messy. That would imply passion. He placed the photo face down on the mantel. A simple inversion, a closed chapter. He sat on the edge of the sofa and opened his laptop one last time. The screen's blue light illuminated his face. He logged into their joint bank account. He transferred exactly half of the savings, not a penny more, not a penny less, into his personal account, one she didn't have access to. Then he went to the cloud drive. He unlinked his devices. He removed himself from the shared calendar. He deleted the dinner with Julian event that was still blinking for tonight. Step by step, bite by bite, Lucas Bennett was ceasing to exist in this ecosystem. He stood up and zipped the duffel bag. The sound was loud in the quiet room, final and harsh like a zipper on a body bag. He walked to the kitchen island. This was where they used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings, back before the promotions, before Julian, before the silence filled the house. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his key ring. He slid the silver key, the one that opened the front door, the mailbox, the life he was leaving, off the ring. He placed it in the center of the marble counter. The metal made a sharp clink against the stone. He didn't write a note. What was there to say? A note would be an invitation for dialogue, a plea to be understood. Lucas didn't want to be understood anymore. He wanted to be gone. He looked around the apartment one last time. It was beautiful. It was stylish. It was empty. Lucas shouldered his bag. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway. He closed the door behind him, listening for the click of the latch. He didn't lock it. He didn't have a key anymore. Down on the street, the Chicago wind was biting, cold enough to numb his face. He hailed. A taxi, the yellow light, a beacon in the gray night. O'Hare Airport, Lucas told the driver as he slid into the back seat. As the car pulled away, merging into the stream of traffic, Lucas didn't look back at the window where he used to live. He looked forward into the dark blur of the highway, toward a future that was terrifyingly, beautifully blank. Elena returned to the apartment 3 hours later. She was flushed with wine and the electric thrill of a secret shared in public. The ride home in Julian's private town car had been filled with hushed promises and the lingering touch of his hand on her knee. She felt powerful, desirable. "Lucas?" she called out as she pushed the door open. The apartment was dark. She flicked the switch. The lights hummed to life, revealing an immaculate, silent living room. "Honestly, Lucas, don't be a child," she muttered, kicking off her heels near the entryway. "Leaving like that was embarrassing. Julian thought you were having a breakdown." No answer. She walked to the bedroom, expecting to find him sulking in bed, back turned to the door, waiting for her to coax him out of his mood. But the bed was made. The sheets were tight, military smooth. "Lucas?" A flicker of irritation pricked at her. She walked back to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. That was when she saw it. The silver key. It sat alone in the center of the dark marble island. It looked small, insignificant, yet it commanded the entire room. There was no note, no dramatic letter filled with accusations, just the metal object that granted access to their life, abandoned like loose change. Elena scoffed. She picked up the key and dropped it into the junk drawer. "So dramatic," she whispered to the empty room. "He'll be back by breakfast when he realizes he forgot his charger." But breakfast came and the apartment remained silent. 2 days passed, then 4. The silence began to change texture. At first, it was the silence of a temper tantrum, loud, heavy, demanding attention. But by the 5th day, it became the silence of a tomb. It was thin, cold, impermanent. Elena checked his location on her phone. Location not found. She checked the bank account. A precise 50% deduction. No more, no less. She called his friends. They hadn't seen him. "He's trying to punish me," she told Julian over lunch on the 7th day. They were at a bistro near her office. "It's passive-aggressive. He wants me to worry." "Let him pout," Julian said, dismissing the topic with a wave of his hand. "He's clearly insecure about your success. You don't need that energy, Elena." Elena nodded, sipping her iced tea. Julian was right. Lucas was just being Lucas, fragile, artistic, incapable of handling the real world. But the unease in her stomach wouldn't settle. 10 days after the dinner party, Elena was in her office. She was in the middle of a strategy meeting for a new tech client, standing at the head of the glass conference table, commanding the room. "We need to control the narrative," and she was saying, gesturing to the whiteboard. "If we don't define the story, the market will define it for us." There was a knock on the glass door. Her assistant, a young woman named Sarah, stepped in, looking pale. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Elena," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "There's a courier here. He says he needs a signature. Personally." "Can it wait?" Elena snapped. "I'm in a meeting." "He said it's legal, Elena. He won't leave." The room went quiet. Her colleagues exchanged glances. Elena straightened her blazer, forcing a smile. "Fine. Excuse me for a moment." She walked out to the reception area. A man in a nondescript windbreaker was waiting, holding a thick manila envelope. He looked bored. "Elena Vance?" he asked. "Yes." "Sign here." He thrust a digital pad at her. She scribbled her signature, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He handed her the envelope and turned to leave without another word. Elena stood there, holding the package. It felt heavy. The return address was a law firm she recognized, one of the top family law practices in the city. Not the kind you hire for a consultation, the kind you hire for a demolition. She didn't open it in the lobby. She walked back to her private office, closed the door, and blinded the glass walls. Her hands shook as she tore the tab. Inside was a stack of documents. The title at the top of the first page was typed in bold, uncompromising font. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Petitioner: Lucas James Bennett. Respondent: Elena Marie Vance. She scanned the pages, her breath catching in her throat. Irreconcilable differences. No contest to assets. Waiver of spousal support. He didn't want money. He didn't want the furniture. He didn't want an apology. He just wanted out. Elena dropped the papers onto her sleek, modern desk. They slid across the polished surface, coming to rest next to her phone. She stared at them. For 5 years, she had been the sun in their solar system, and Lucas had been the planet orbiting her, dependent on her gravity. She had assumed he would always be there, tolerating her orbit, grateful for her light. But he hadn't just left the orbit, he had vanished from the galaxy. She picked up her phone and dialed his number again. It didn't even ring, just the immediate hollow tone of a disconnected line. For the first time since the dinner party, the reality crashed into her. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a punishment. He was gone. And looking at the perfectly drafted legal documents, she realized with a sickening jolt that he had likely been gone long before he walked out that door. Seattle tasted like rain and sawdust. 18 months after leaving Chicago, Luca Bennett stood on the fourth floor of a skeletal timber frame in the Fremont district. The wind coming off the canal was merciless, driving the misty drizzle into the exposed skin of his neck. "Bennett, quit daydreaming and secure that joist!" The foreman's voice cut through the noise of the power saws. Lucas didn't flinch. He adjusted his grip on the nail gun, lined up the shot, and fired. Thud, hiss. Thud, hiss. The recoil vibrated up his arm, settling into the deep ache in his shoulder that had become his constant companion. He wasn't an architect here. He was just Bennett, the quiet guy on the crew who showed up early, worked late, and never joined the others for beers after shifts. His hands, once smooth from handling nothing heavier than a drafting pencil, were now rough, scarred, and perpetually stained with oil and wood glue. He welcomed the change. The physical exhaustion was a narcotic. When his body screamed for rest, his mind was too tired to replay the loop of Elena's laughter at the dinner party. At 5 p.m., the whistle blew. Lucas packed his tools methodically. He walked 20 minutes to a bus stop, then rode another 30 minutes to a small basement studio in a neighborhood that was more industrial than residential. The apartment was smaller than Elena's walk-in closet. It had a single window at street level that offered a view of passing tires and wet pavement. He stripped off his work boots, leaving them by the door. He showered, scrubbing the day's grime from his skin with a bar of cheap soap. Then the second shift began. Lucas sat at a drafting table he had built himself from scrap wood scavenged from the site. He didn't have high-end software or a team of interns. He had vellum, pencils, and a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. He turned on a single desk lamp. For the first 6 months, he hadn't been able to draw a line. Every time he tried, Mère Chamade, he heard her voice calling his work imaginary castles. But slowly the paralysis had broken. The anger had distilled into focus. He wasn't designing for the Gold Coast anymore. He wasn't designing to impress Julian Thorne or the critics who drank vintage Cabernet. He was designing for the wind. He was designing for the rain. He looked at the blueprints spread out before him. Project Sanctuary. It was a modular housing concept designed to be built cheaply but beautifully, utilizing recycled materials and maximizing natural light for overcast climates. It was dignified. It was sustainable. It was everything Elena had mocked, stripped of the pretense and fortified by the reality of his own struggle. His phone buzzed on the table. It was a rare occurrence. He glanced at the screen. It was an email notification. Subject, Final Decree of Divorce. Bennett View. Vance Lucas stared at the notification. He didn't click it, he didn't reply. He didn't feel relief, nor did he feel regret. He simply felt the quiet click of a heavy door locking shut. He archived the email, plunging the digital notification into the void. He picked up his pencil, sharpened it to a fine, deadly point, and returned to the vellum. The sound of graphite scratching against paper was the only conversation he needed. 3 years. It had been 3 years since the dinner party, and the Chicago penthouse was exactly as cold as Lucas had remembered it, though the heating bill was astronomical. Elena stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master bedroom, adjusting a diamond earring. The stones were massive, heavy things that dragged at her lobes. Julian had given them to her last week for her birthday. He hadn't wrapped them. He had simply slid the velvet box across the kitchen island while on a conference call with the Tokyo, mouthing "Happy Birthday," before pointing to a clause in a contract. "Elena, hurry up. The driver has been waiting for 10 minutes. Julian's voice drifted in from the hallway. He appeared in the doorway a moment later, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked older. The gray at his temples was distinguished, but the lines around his mouth had deepened into a permanent grimace of dissatisfaction. "Do I look all right?" Elena asked, turning to him. She was fishing. She knew she was fishing. She hated herself for it. Julian barely glanced up from his phone. "You look expensive." "That's the point, isn't it? It's a charity gala, Elena. Don't overthink it." He didn't say she looked beautiful. He didn't walk over to kiss her neck. He treated her like he treated his properties, an asset to be maintained, polished, and displayed to increase his own valuation. Right, Elena said, her voice tight. Expensive. She grabbed her clutch and followed him to the elevator. The gala was a blur of air kisses and hollow compliments. Elena stood by Julian's side, playing the role she had auditioned for 3 years ago. She laughed at the right jokes. She nodded at the boring stories about yacht maintenance. She was the perfect partner. But inside, she was screaming. Around 10 p.m., Julian wandered off to discuss zoning laws with a senator. Elena slipped away to the ladies' room. The silence of the tiled restroom was a relief. She leaned against the marble sink, staring at her reflection. She looked perfect, and she looked exhausted. She pulled her phone from her clutch. Her thumb hovered over the search bar. It was a habit now, an addiction she indulged in only when she was absolutely alone. She typed, Lucas Bennett, architect. Search. No new results. Just the same old LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in 4 years. The same few photos from university, no current address, no firm website, no social media presence. It was as if he had stepped off the edge of the earth. Sometimes late at night when Julian was asleep, she would scroll through her own old photos, looking for him in the background. But she had deleted almost everything in a fit of rage after he left. The few blurry images that remained, the back of his head at a picnic, his hand holding a coffee cup, were like artifacts from a lost civilization. Where are you? She whispered to the screen. She wanted him to be miserable. She wanted to find a mugshot or a blog post about him, failing, or even a picture of him looking disheveled in a dive bar. Anything to validate her choice. Anything to prove that she was the winner and he was the loser. But the silence was his revenge. By disappearing, he denied her the narrative she needed to survive. The bathroom door opened, and a group of young women spilled in, laughing loudly. Elena quickly locked her phone and shoved it into her bag. She straightened her spine, put on her mask of indifference, and turned to check her lipstick. Did you see Julian Thorne's wife? One of the girls whispered loudly. She looks miserable. I heard she used to be fun, another replied, before she married the money. Elena froze. The lipstick in her hand snapped. She stared at the broken red wax, a jagged wound in the perfect cylinder. She didn't turn around to confront them. She couldn't, because the terrifying thing wasn't that they were being mean. The terrifying thing was that they were right. 5 years after leaving Chicago, Lucas Bennett had become a master of disappearing. He lived in a small, weathered A-frame cabin on the outskirts of Seattle, accessible only by a gravel road that washed out every spring. The trees here were ancient and dense, forming a green wall that separated him from the world. Inside, the cabin was a fortress of solitude. Plans for Project Sanctuary covered the walls, no longer just sketches on napkins, but fully realized blueprints, 3D renderings, and structural analyses. He was 37 now. His hair was threaded with premature silver at the temples, and his face was leaner, etched with the lines of hard labor and deep thought. He didn't look like the soft, eager husband who had begged for approval at cocktail parties. He looked like the mountains surrounding him, immovable. It was a Tuesday morning, raining, when the phone rang. It wasn't his cell phone, he kept that off mostly. It was the landline he'd installed for emergencies. Lucas stared at the dusty device on the kitchen counter. It rang again, a shrill mechanical intrusion. He picked it up. Bennett, is this Lucas Bennett, the submitter of entry 4092 to the Global Urbanism Horizon Grant? The voice was British, crisp, and official. Lucas leaned against the counter, watching the rain streak the window. 6 months ago, in a moment of reckless hope, he had submitted his portfolio to the Horizon Grant. It was the most prestigious architectural award in the world, a blind submission process where judges saw only the work, never the name. I am, Lucas said. Mr. Bennett, the voice softened, losing its bureaucratic edge. I am calling from Zurich. The committee has deliberated. Your design, the living grid, has been selected unanimously as this decade's recipient. Lucas didn't speak. He heard the words, but they felt abstract, like a language he hadn't spoken in years. The grant comes with $20 million in funding to break ground, the man continued. And of course, the global partnership with the UN Habitat Program. $20 million. It was enough to build the first 3 phases. It was enough to prove that affordable housing didn't have to be bleak. It was validation on a scale that made Julian Thorne's luxury high-rises look like dollhouses. "Mr. Bennett, are you there?" "I'm here," Lucas said, his voice raspy. "There is one condition, sir. The Horizon Grant is about leadership. We do not fund anonymous projects. We need a face, we need a voice. You will be required to fly to New York next week for the official unveiling and a primetime interview." Lucas closed his eyes. New York, primetime, the world. For 5 years, he had protected his peace like a fragile flame in a windstorm. He had hidden to heal. If he accepted this, the silence would break. The noise would rush back in, and somewhere in Chicago, in a penthouse overlooking the lake, she would see him. He thought of the cold look in Elena's eyes that night. He thought of the way she had reduced his life's work to a joke for her lover's amusement. And then, he looked at the blueprints on his wall. He looked at the designs that could shelter thousands of families who had been forgotten by men like Julian. He realized then that his silence had served its purpose. It had built him a fortress. But a fortress was not a home, and hiding was not living. "Mr. Bennett?" Lucas opened his eyes. He saw his reflection in the dark window. He didn't see a victim anymore. "I'll be there," Lucas said. "Excellent. We'll send the itinerary. Welcome to the future, Mr. Bennett." Lucas hung up the phone. The cabin was quiet again, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of hiding. It was the silence of a deep breath before the plunge. He walked to the closet and pulled out the single garment bag he had kept from his old life. He unzipped it. Inside was a charcoal suit, the one he had worn to his wedding. He touched the fabric. It was time to suit up. Not for her, for himself. Elena lay on the king-size bed in her suite at the Plaza in New York, staring at the ceiling. She was in the city for Fashion Week, representing a new client, but the glamour of the event had long since faded into a dull headache. Julian hadn't come. He had sent a text saying he had urgent business in Miami, which Elena knew meant he was with his 24-year-old paralegal. She should care. She should be angry, but she just felt tired. She rolled over and grabbed the remote, clicking the TV on. She needed noise. Silence had become her enemy over the last few years. It gave her too much time to think. She cycled through the channels: news, weather, a sitcom rerun. She stopped on a major global news network. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Exclusive, the architect of the future, a rare interview." She was about to change the channel when the camera cut to the guest sitting opposite the famous anchor. Elena's heart stopped. It wasn't a figure of speech. For a terrifying second, her chest seized and the air left her lungs. It was him. He looked different. The soft boyishness around his jaw was gone, replaced by a sharp, rugged definition. His hair was shorter, peppered with gray that hadn't been there when he left, but he was wearing the charcoal suit, the one she had picked out for their wedding, the one she had told him made him look like a serious man. "Lucas," she breathed, the name scraping her throat. On the screen, the anchor leaned forward. "Lucas Bennett, you were a ghost for 5 years. You vanished from the scene entirely. And now you reemerge with a $20 million grant and a design that the UN is calling revolutionary. Where were you?" Lucas looked directly into the camera. His eyes were calm. There was no fear in them anymore. "I was rebuilding," Lucas said. His voice was deeper than she remembered. Sometimes you have to tear a structure down to the foundation to realize the soil underneath was poison. Elena sat up, clutching the duvet. Her hands were trembling. "Your work, the living grid," the anchor continued. "Critics are saying it prioritizes dignity over profit. It's almost anti-luxury. What inspired this philosophy?" Lucas smiled. It was a small, sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I spent a long time trying to build castles for people who only cared about the view," Lucas said. "I tried to impress people who measured worth in square footage and zip codes. I lost myself in that pursuit." "And what changed?" The camera zoomed in on Lucas's face. Elena felt like he was looking right through the screen, right into the lonely, expensive hotel room where she sat. "I was given a gift," Lucas said softly. "The gift of total destruction. Someone I loved very much showed me that my dreams were a joke to them. At the time, it destroyed me. But looking back, it was the moment I became free. If they hadn't broken me, I never would have built this. Elena gasped. A sob ripped from her throat, violent and sudden. So, the anchor asked, do you resent them? For the pain? No, Lucas said. I don't resent the storm for clearing the dead wood. I just hope they found whatever it was they were looking for, because I certainly found myself. He looked at the camera one last time. I found that silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. The interview ended. The studio applause washed over the audio. Elena stared at the screen. The tears were hot on her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She looked around the plaza suite. The silk curtains, the crystal chandelier, the room service tray with the untouched champagne. It was everything she had told Lucas she wanted. It was the life she had mocked him for not providing. And now, seeing him sitting there, dignified, celebrated, and utterly complete without her, she realized the horrific truth. He hadn't been holding her back. She had been the anchor, dragging him down. She grabbed her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, searching for his number, the one she had deleted but never forgotten. She didn't know if he would answer. She didn't know what she would say. But before she could hit dial, she saw a reflection in the dark television screen as the broadcast faded to black. She saw a woman in an expensive room, wearing expensive jewelry, with absolutely nothing of value in her life. She dropped the phone on the bed. It didn't make a sound on the plush duvet. It was too late. He wasn't just gone. He had ascended, and she was still exactly where he had left her, in the dark, with the ones who pay for the wine. The morning after the broadcast, New York City was gray and slick with drizzle. Elena stood across the street from the television studio, her trench coat pulled tight against the chill. She knew he was still inside. She had seen the schedule online. A follow-up recording for the international syndication was slated for 9 o'clock a.m. It was now 10:30. She wasn't sure what she was doing here. An apology? A plea? Or just the selfish need to prove that she was real? That she wasn't just a metaphor in his success story? The glass doors of the studio opened. A small group of people exited, laughing and talking. In the center of the group was Lucas. He looked lighter in person than he had on screen. He was talking to a woman beside him, an architect from the UN committee, Elena recognized from the news. They were discussing load-bearing walls, their hands moving in sync as they sketched shapes in the air. He was smiling, a genuine, unburdened smile. Elena stepped off the curb. Lucas. Her voice was swallowed by the traffic noise. She walked closer, dodging a yellow taxi. Lucas. This time he heard. He stopped. The group stopped. He turned his head slowly, scanning the street until his eyes locked onto hers. The smile didn't drop from his face instantly. It faded slowly, like a sunset surrendering to twilight. He said something to his colleagues, excusing himself, and walked toward her. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to smell the rain on his coat, far enough to feel the canyon between them. Elena, he said. His voice was polite, neutral. It was the voice you use for a stranger who has dropped a glove. I saw the interview, she said, her breath hitching. You were incredible. Thank you. Lucas, She struggled to find the words. The speech she had rehearsed in the hotel room, the one about her regrets, about Julian, about how empty the penthouse felt, suddenly seemed pathetic. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. For everything. For that night. Lucas looked at her. He studied her face, taking in the expensive coat, the tired eyes, the faint tremor in her hands. I know, he said softly. I made a mistake, Lucas. A terrible mistake. She took a half step forward, an instinctual reach for the intimacy they used to share. Is there any chance we could get coffee, just to talk, to catch up? Lucas didn't step back. He simply didn't move. He stood his ground, rooted in the life he had built from the wreckage. No, Elena. The rejection wasn't angry. It was factual. Why, she whispered. Because the man you're looking for doesn't exist anymore, Lucas said. You killed him that night, and honestly, I'm grateful you did. I like who I am now much better. He looked past her toward the skyline where new towers were rising against the clouds. I have a plane to catch, he said, turning his gaze back to her one last time. Take care of yourself, Elena. I mean that. He turned around. Lucas, she called out, desperation leaking into her voice. Do you hate me? He paused, but he didn't look back. I don't think about you at all, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. He walked back to his group. The woman from the UN touched his arm, asking him a question, and he laughed, the sound carrying over the wet pavement. They turned the corner and vanished into the city. Elena stood alone on the sidewalk. The rain began to fall harder, drumming against the fabric of her coat. People rushed past her, heads down, chasing their own dreams, their own deadlines. She looked at the empty space where he had stood. There was no tragedy here, no screaming match, no grand finale, just the quiet, crushing weight of consequence. She turned and began the long walk back to the hotel, back to the empty suite, back to the silent phone. She was the wife of a rich man. She was successful. She was beautiful. And she was the architect of her own silence.